Well, good evening. I'm Bob Graves, and they call me the Unconventional Pastor. Good to be back again with you tonight, and I'm going to be talking about something that's exciting. I'm going to be talking about sin. Don't you think most sins are exciting? Anyway, but we're gonna talk about sin. And if you've heard me speak in the past, you know that I've often said things such as, I find the Bible to be translated in a manner that because it because translations rely very heavily on a what they think of as a research into the root meanings of words, instead of trying to understand how those words were actually used in the language. They look at root meanings and they try to derive what they think would be, therefore, the reason why God would choose that word rather than any other word. And then they try to suck out of that word the deepest respect for God that they can in trying to make sure that the full flavor of that word comes out in the translation. And it really results in translations that say things that the words don't mean. First of all, because they're not really used that way, and furthermore, it ends up being a translation that is extremely full of drama, a translation that's full of hyperbole. Um, I remember one time, I'm not going to tell you who it was, but I remember one time listening to somebody who was um, expressing to me some great angst over some perfection they were really hoping to accomplish, and their concerns about all the things that were preventing this perfection from coming about. And in this particular conversation, it was a little hard to get a word in edgewise, and I wasn't all that good at getting word in edgewise anyway. Uh, but anyway, as they're going on and on and on and on, there was nothing I could say or do or whatever. But we finally get to a point where the conversation has to come to an end, and I'm not sure what to say because it just struck me as a lot of hyperbole and drama. And I don't think the person talking to me was under that impression. So my reaction was, "Oh my God!" You know, and I started acting really shocked. And I was fortunate that the tactless act actually ended up working out well, and the person I was talking to was aware of the fact that we were getting a little dramatic. And when we read the Bible, you find that there's many things in it that present this hard and harsh and powerful message of where God is coming from and who we are and all that stuff. Well, when it comes time to talk about sin, uh, this in some ways is the capstone of all of this hyperbole, of all of this drama. The whole concept seems to the fulcrum of it seems to rest upon this issue of, oh my goodness, you guys are sinners, and so we need to we need to talk about sin. But I want to talk about a more, what I think of as a more realistic understanding of this word sin. And I'm not sure just how long it's going to take me. I might have to actually do this for a couple of shows. I don't know. Not that I want to focus so much on concepts of sin, but I would encourage you, if you could, you know, text in, send in a message on Ustream. Give us messages. Give us feedback. Talk to me and help me to respond to things you find meaningful, interesting, or questions that I might actually raise for you, um, based on what we're talking about. First of all, of course, I already began by telling you that I perceive the text as being often translated with so much hyperbole, so much drama, that it's difficult to really get a balanced message. And sometimes that drama is so overdone that it actually gets into the absurd. I mean, just the totally absurd, and something that is so terribly wrong. I remember one time, I think I've even mentioned this a couple of times, maybe even on the show or talking with at least Dr. Jones. I know I've talked about it. Uh, I was reading the text of scripture once in the area where we have the unpardonable sin. that sin that if you commit that, sorry, you're done. All eternity. You just can't ever, 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 ever be forgiven for that one, which is kind of odd when you stop to think of it, that there could be a moment in time where compared to God, a tiny little human being can do something that a huge, 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 big God of love can never get on the other side of. The notion to begin with is kind of obtuse, in my opinion. But anyway, studying that text of scripture, and I was actually trying to do studies of the original words and to see how they were used in other documents, and not just how they're defined by some of the theological dictionaries, but rather how the words were used. And I came to the conclusion that that word blasphemy, which is such a wonderful church word that in most translations, they don't actually translate the word blasphemy. They just use the Greek word blasphemy. And because, when you think about it, what does blasphemy mean? My goodness, you have just offended God in the most, or said deeply vitriolic, horrible, awful things about God. It's blasphemy. Looking at that word, what does it really mean? And I came to the conclusion that the way the word was used, it was used in a context that was rarely anywhere near as dramatic as some horrible offense to God. Rather, the word was used in situations where someone seems to be dragging their feet a little bit slow to acknowledge that something that is really very, very good is indeed good. It's a word that is used to reference the slowness to acknowledging the good in something. It isn't really some horrendous accusation of evil slander. Now, when you realize the way the word is used and that it means that, this actually turns the concept of the unpardonable sin into something even all the more absurd. That a person who might be a little slow in getting around to appreciate that Jesus is good, that it was good that he came, that this person is someone, well, we can forgive them. But somebody who's a little slow to recognize and acknowledge that the Holy Spirit is an essential aspect of what's going on with us. Oh, I'm sorry, your slowness is going to cost you all eternity. Sorry, we can't forgive you ever. Not now, not tomorrow, not in the days to come, ever. When you realize what the word blasphemy really means and what it meant in the original language, and you get away from all this hyperbole, it actually turns the context into something that is that presents God as having some real difficult issues. Makes you wonder if when it says that who has been his counselor, if it's a cry for help. But anyhow, then even looking at the word for forgiveness, which has more of a sense of turning something into a non-issue, something that can be overlooked. It's not really so much I have a legitimate claim against you, but I am dismissing it. But rather the relationship working to a point where some of the things that might have been a problem are just not an issue anymore. There's just not an issue. And when you take a look at it, I find that text, when I read it without the hyperbole and alter a few words so that we're not, leaning into the hyperbole, that I find that basically what Jesus seems to be saying is that if you don't realize that it's a good thing that I'm here, this isn't really going to be that big of a problem. But if you just don't understand how good it is that there's the Holy Spirit, we're going to have trouble working around that. And today, tomorrow, or any day. And there's a sense in which Jesus is saying this is kind of essential. We kind of got to get this part established for what we're doing here to begin to work. And, I think that there's a sense in being conscious of God's presence does seem to have a very nurturing effect upon our spirituality, even if we don't know the name Jesus or understand that we're talking about this God or that God, but to be aware of just God, whoever that may be, and the presence. And there's something about that really can be nurturing to our spirituality. This is more the line of what I get Jesus is talking about when you get all that hyperbole out of there. And so, going back now to just the notions of sin in general, it also brings us to the problem of evil. Now, I don't know if you know about this, but the Greek culture that was really foundational to Western perspectives is very much alive today. Most of what became important to Western culture began being important to Western culture during the days of the golden age of the Greek Empire. The tremendous scholars and their influence and their pursuit of science and mathematics and a number of just considerable insights that they made as mankind is growing in knowledge and understanding and pursuing things, and also a great deal of philosophy as they sought to make sense of life and meaning and things like that. That Epicurus was the person who we tend to credit with having first stated the problem of evil. And basically, the way he would put it is that, if there's an all-powerful good God and he exists, then evil does not. And since there's evil in the world, therefore an all perfectly wonderful, powerful, good, benevolent God does not exist. And that was basically the way he put it. Since then, the argument has been expanded and analyzed and looked at in various ways until it's reached, actually wrote it down here, it's reached a multi-point progression of an argument. Number one, let's just assume God exists. Number two, God is omnipotent, omniscient, and perfectly good. Number three, a perfectly good being would want to prevent all evils. Next, an omniscient being knows every way in which evils can come into existence. Being, an omniscient being, he can know all the ways in which evils can come into existence. And then the next one, an omnipotent being who knows every way in which an evil can come into existence, has the power to prevent that evil from coming into existence. The next part of that argument then goes on to say, a being who knows every way in which an evil can come into existence, who is able to prevent that evil from coming into existence, and who wants to do so, would prevent the existence of that evil. If there exists an omnipotent, omniscient, and perfectly good being, then no evil exists. But evil exists. This is a logical contradiction. Therefore, God does not exist. Now, I gotta be honest with you. I do think that the argument begins to discuss the concept of evil in a way that does present a very real problem. But I gotta be honest with you. I think that it only presents a problem of evil when you believe that evil exists. Now, I'm not going to say, oh, there's just nothing that you could ever call evil. There's evil. No, it's not there. What I want to say is this, that there's a sense in which dark doesn't exist. Dark is not a thing. It is an absence of a thing. Light is a thing. It's sometimes it acts like a particle, sometimes it acts like a wave, but it is a phenomenon that exists. It's there. And when that phenomenon doesn't exist, we call its absence dark. But just because we have a noun that we use to describe that condition does not mean we're actually talking about a thing. Dark doesn't exist. Dark conditions do, and the cause of a dark condition is the absence of light. Same thing's true with heat and cold. Cold doesn't exist. We use the word cold to talk about a condition where heat is not as present. And sometimes we use it relatively, but the truth is heat is a form of energy. Cold is just the absence of that energy being. It isn't a thing in and of itself. So whenever we're having a problem with cold, we're not really having a problem with something that is there. We're having a problem with something that isn't there. Heat, when the house is too cold and you need to turn the furnace on, it's because the heat is missing. It's not because there's cold there, you know. And in a sense, evil, evil is in a sense the absence of a better outcome. It's the absence of love. It's the absence of a useful development that could have um, prevented a consequence from having turned out as badly as it did. But evil can even be an unfortunate outcome of other things that had no real, I mean, like an earthquake. It's not as if the earthquake was choosing or determined to do something malevolent. It's just a natural process of the earth, and it results sometimes in some rather horrific experiences for human beings who have not prepared to deal with with those consequences. And we can call that evil, but that's really just a value we're placing on, and I think a very useful value that we're placing on it. But it's not as if we're actually talking about something that really exists. And so um, I don't really have a problem with evil. Um, Contrary to the way a lot of people who know me might think that I got a real problem with evil. uh, but evil isn't the problem. Uh, Development, preparation, circumstances can be a problem. The lack of love can be a problem. And the solution to these evils, it may be various. Some of them that can't be resolved. I mean, you're never going to stop floods and hurricanes and things like that. Not as long as the earth is continuing to be as it is. And so, even our calling these things evils is really just a relative judgment because we find it doesn't work out so well for us. But the earth doesn't care, and it's not really trying to do anything bad to us. It's just being itself, and we have to learn how to live in an environment that is what it is, and sometimes that doesn't work out so well. But to try to turn evil into something that doesn't even exist, I think that creates the problem of evil. And that if we're going to think of evil as something that really does exist, then we have to account for its existence. We have to try to understand all these things. And I think that this argument against evil does, or the argument against God through the problem of evil, does point out to us some of the difficulty of logic that we have when we begin defining God in a particular way and defining evil in a particular way. We are creating a conundrum that collapses in contradiction. And it is amazing the kind of spinning of wheels that goes on with various different theologians to try to still keep it the way they want to keep it. I want to suggest that we need to think about this thing a little bit deeper. We need to really give it some thought and try to recognize that that there definitely are issues and problems and difficulties and disappointments and deeds and behavior where people are misguided, uh, uh, malicious in their intent and things like this. And we need to start taking a better look at what's going on and what is needed and where these causes really come from, rather than attributing it to some non-existent thing, such as evil. There are conditions, situations, behaviors, and a wide variety of other things that we can talk about as evil, and it's a useful way of talking about it. But the moment we think we're actually talking about a thing in and of itself, we're starting now to give substance and materiality to something that has no substance, has no materiality. It really doesn't exist. That may strike you strange to hear that. Um, Interestingly enough, it was another a Greek philosopher who helped Augustine and various others come up with a concept of what sin must be, as they actually used, if I recall correctly, it's been a while since I looked at some of the stuff. I think they used one of the arguments that was used to try to explain causes and the various different axes and aspects of cause based on when you see a house. There's a house. How did that house get there? What caused that house to be there? And there was this popular argument or story that's told about the house that explains that how it got there. That an agent must have put the house there. The house is there because somebody thought having a house would serve a purpose, and so that sense of purpose causes the house. It is caused to be a thing in and of itself, so that it can then be there as a thing in and of itself to serve its purposes. And so this is another aspect of cause. I mean, go on, Lisa. We'll talk about a little bit later in the show here about how these concepts of philosophy then became applied to give sin and evil a sense of substance and materiality as a thing that has come into existence by various different causes. Now, fundamentalists tend to agree that there's some things we can say about sin. Sounds like we have a comment that is coming up here. Okay. Viewer comment. Evil is just a word. Behind there is pain. Love is the solution, and friendship. I totally agree with that. You know, um, I don't, there may be better examples to use than the one I'm going to use here, but the example I want to use is one that is on that when I read that, it made me think of an incident I was involved in. I was talking to just a wonderful man that I know as a friend of mine here locally, and he was going through some issues with his wife, and he felt very badly about it. And he wanted to know what he could do about some of these things that brought his wife some pain. And I told him, I don't want to get into any details, but I told him, I said, I don't think there's anything that you can do about this pain, but your wife needs to know that she's lovely, that she is wonderful to you. And by that, I don't mean just physical loveliness. I mean that her existence is to you a lovely thing. If she can know that you treasure her, that you consider her existence as precious, then some of these things that we don't understand or that might be painful can cease to be issues, even if there is pain. That what people need more than anything is to be loved, to be genuinely loved, authentically loved, and that made me think of that love really is the focus we need in recognizing how it is we get around all this problem we've invented in creating an overly hyperbolic and exaggerated dramatic sense of sin and evil. Love is definitely the answer. In fact, I really even see the entire concept of the gospel as caught up in this very dynamic of love. The law treats trespass, transgression, pride, and all of these things that should be an offensive stench to the very nostrils of God, and turns them into an issue. And along comes the gospel that says, so how's that working for you? Did that cure your ills? Did that solve the problem? Or did it actually make things even worse? Thou shalt not covet, creates in me coveting of every kind. Well, you might have meant well, but it didn't work out so well, did it? But love is where we focus on the real value of the preciousness of being human, of being people, of being persons, and of having a relationship, of having the ideas, the thoughts, the feelings, and the needs, and the vulnerabilities that we have. And love is very much the sense in which that is the way to address the issues and the problems and the development that we need to go through and the challenges we will face and the pains that will no doubt be a part, some of them unavoidable in life itself. Back to the thing we were talking about here before, there are some things that many fundamentalists will agree on, and that is that God cannot create sin, they will say, and that God cannot sin, or God cannot permit sin, and He can't promote it. But they will let God use sin for the greater good. So sin since it does exist, can be incorporated into God's plan and woven in. And this is how this concept of the evil and the sin that is seen as a part of our nature, a bogus idea, this is how it is allowed to remain even in the process of the gospel, that therefore God gets to work this issue out over time without ever having to own any responsibility for it. Being it's in a sense, this is all really a different way of spinning out an answer to the argument of the problem of evil. um, Now there's some who would want to tell you that sin didn't actually begin on the earth. It didn't begin with Adam and Eve. It began with Lucifer up in heaven during the Great Rebellion. And they use verses from Isaiah to talk about it, where, Lucifer, who's the king of Babylon, wants to rise up into heaven and to take over the throne and his pride and all this. Now, I think it is because of the name Lucifer, and it is because of the story that this fits in so well with, that we can tell about Satan, about the personification of Satan, I should say, that that this verse gets attributed to being actually a verse about Satan. I don't know that it is. It's just a verse talking about the shameful pride of this king of Babylon, and it seems to work for this other secondary purpose. It was difficult for me to tell. I can't, since the Hellenization of Judaism, Judaism has taken on many Western concepts that it didn't have from its own culture. I have had a hard time, and if any of you find this out, I'd appreciate your letting me know. I've had a hard time trying to find out if Jews even had a concept of any sort of an actual person, Satan, rather than treating Satan as a personification. I can't find anything that pre-Hellenized Judaism would actually attribute to that anything other than a fictitious personification, which was a way of kind of distancing ourselves from the reality of temptation, the reality of what draws us, of what seduces us ourselves. And by personifying it and externalizing it, it probably made it a much more perhaps a much more copable concept, but also may have actually put it out there where you can see it, as it were, and kind of deal with it without getting so caught up in self to make it more effective. I don't know. I haven't been able to determine all those things, but that would certainly cause us to have to wonder if Isaiah chapter 14, I think it is actually being properly understood as applying to this. But supposedly, according to this story, and they combine that with a verse in Revelation where it talks about how a third of the stars were swept out, and how this represents the Satan and his demons and the rebellion and all that. This gets worked into the story that Satan has fallen and all this other stuff, and then comes down here to planet Earth to tempt human beings who have just been created by God. And then this is where we get that house example. We finally get to that point that so we now find Adam and Eve, and here they are. They're ready to be victimized. Now, this is an interesting story, and I think it is just a story, and I don't think it was ever intended to be anything but a story. It's just that's in many ways very symbolic. I don't think it was even meant to be literal. First of all, because of the personification of Satan in the story, the way that it works there. So it's, and by the way, in Hebrew culture, they had no problem mixing literary and elements into even semi-historical accounts. They didn't have any need in that culture at that time to make sure that types of literature followed a specific genre, such as this is history, so we're only going to deal with facts: who, what, where, when, why, how, and literature didn't work that way back then because they didn't have a need for it to work that way. Today, we think we do, and so that's why we deal with history and news the way we do, and deal with poetry and fiction the way we do, and give certain license to some and not that same license to others. But It's not true necessarily of ancient languages and ancient conditions and ancient cultures who didn't have the same needs, concerns, worries, or problems that we do. Anyhow, so sin is therefore explained in this story as being caused by an agent, and that agent would, of course, be Satan. You know, caused by a purpose. It was the purpose behind sin was to try to score a win of the battle, part of the strategy of Satan to overtake the throne of God, and that mankind is, in some sense, a point in that battle where if he can take over mankind, he's gained a certain territory that gives him an advantage in overtaking this throne. You know, it's kind of silly when you stop to think about the implications of the story. We talk about Satan as if he's some sort of real existing thing and highly intelligent and capable of doing so many devious things. And we're saying that the being this intelligent can't figure out that the idea of usurping the throne of God is like not going to work. I mean, you know, there comes a time when, you know, if you're talking to somebody who's kind of writing the script to a movie and they're telling you this storyline, and then there's something in the story and you realize, okay, this isn't a comedy. This is a drama. It's an action adventure, and you got this little element to your story. It's just not believable. It's not going to work. People are going to watch the movie up until this point, and when this part of the plot turns in this way, they're going to go, well, that was a cheap, you know, that was dumb. It don't work, you know. And so when we start taking this personification of Satan seriously, we begin to say something that, if you're going to think about it, as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't work. It's absurd to think that there could be someone as powerful and as intelligent and as amazing a being as Satan, as the head angel and all this stuff, could ever be lost in this concept that he actually has this chance of taking over the throne of God, or that he would even want it. You know, what would he want that for? What, you know, how does that serve anybody's purposes? You know, it's just a crazy idea. But they don't stop to think about that because it helps, I think, our manipulative religion to buy into that, I guess. So anyway, so Satan's purposes are involved in that. And the materiality and substance of this argument that comes from the Greek philosophy as to how this house gets there, it actually now the house becomes a substantive, something made of substance, something that has materiality. It now exists as a thing in and of itself. And they use this argument to then say that sin is the same way. Now that Satan, according to his purposes, and as the successful agent has come to man, sin is now a thing in and of itself. In fact, it's your very nature. That's their argument. It's become a thing in and of itself. And it is caused to be made something that now is also made up of existing materials. Just like the house might be built from wood and rocks and mud and things that existed in other forms, now sin exists as a part of human nature. And so they see that the typical view is that sin now not only is something that exists, but it's made out of you. Yeah, you, and me, and things like that, according to the typical traditional view. And none of that, but the house that is caused to be in such a way as that it will, for its useful lifetime, continue to be. And so sin is also something which, once it is there, it is in you, and it is permanent. It's going to be there. It's going to remain. It's infused with your soul, and nothing, save the blood of Christ, I guess, can rid your soul of its terrible, dark stain and the way it has altered the nature that you were originally created with. It is caused to become something that will also go on to have further outcomes and further results. The house that exists is a place where a family can grow, certain children will come out of this. It'll become the center of where a great deal of work is done. The rest that is required for the next day's work and stuff. And so, as a result of this house being there, there will be many things down the road that will then come into existence because of the fact that this house now becomes a contributing cause to further things that will now be caused to exist. And so, sin is seen this way. And this argument of the house is then borrowed to try to understand where sin comes from. And of course, we don't. I doubt that you're going to go to a church these days that's a Bible believing church, and they're going to give you this house argument because they try to just assume a lot of these things which are already taught without even questioning them, and then they just start quoting Bible verses at you. We have another comment here. So, are you saying the people like Hitler or Coney or simply people who lack love, they're not evil? The things they do aren't evil. Well, as we use this word evil to describe the circumstances and the conditions, I think it's an absolutely wonderful word to describe people like Hitler and the things that they do as being evil. But I'm saying that that primarily, yes, that it is the fact that something terrible happened to Hitler that caused him to turn away from love, to consider love as an appropriate way of life, to consider love as a way of thinking of Jews, to think of love as a way of thinking of other people. And human beings aren't going to human beings who do not turn to love as a way of living are not going to therefore just sit down in a chair and wait for death. They can go about, do other things. They're going to have other motives, other needs, and these things get distorted. A desire to become, to have a meaningful role in life is something that when guided by love can be an awesome thing. But just because you don't love doesn't mean you're not going to have a desire, a natural desire, a biological desire to accomplish things. And, the lust for power and this and all that. So I would say, yes, this evil is the result of genuine biological, psychological drives in a human being who is pursuing these things that a human being cannot help but have as part of their personality makeup without having chosen love. And so, yes, I would say that people like Hitler are people who they don't just lack love in their attitude; they lack love in their development. This is a deep, layered process of the way that they view reality, full of great attachments, full of numerous experiences that reconfirm and confirm a worldview that then leaves them in a situation where they find this kind of behavior meaningful and acceptable. And I would say the absence of love in the entire process, not just in their heart at the moment, is responsible for how they developed in the way that they did and why they now behave the way they do in both ways. So yes, I would say that it is a lack of love. And we've talked about love before. I should talk about it again sometime. But it's not just an emotion. It's not just something that you feel right now or don't feel right now. It is a significant experience of vital value of self, of others, and it alters the way we make sense of ourselves, the way we make sense of others in the process of dealing with the issues of life. And we end up developing a philosophy that either resists the embracing of love or a philosophy that embraces love. And so, yeah, anyway, so we've talked about sin so far. Now, one of the people who, it may surprise you to know this, that the early church didn't really always have a theology of sin. They talked about it. We talked about sin. Even the word hamartia is a reference to missing the mark. And by the way, that word was not used for behaviors that were heinous to God, that were a part of your nature, so that God couldn't stand the stench of you in the nostril of his presence. It wasn't that icebergs don't exist. Yes, icebergs exist. Icebergs are things, but icebergs are made of water, and they are made of water that lacks heat. And they're not made of water that contains cold. So icebergs exist. Um, of course they do. But um, yeah, that's I don't know. That could be Joey just jabbing at me. Oh no. Okay. Somebody's comment. Okay. Well, that strikes me as a rhetorical remark that I don't know. I don't want to disrespect it. I don't want to, but it strikes me as a rhetorical mark that's trying to find contradiction in the logic of the way words can be constructed instead of the logic of the nature of things themselves. So I'm not sure, but I enjoyed the comment anyway. Um, there was a time when the church didn't possess a theology of sin. Sin was just everything from missing the mark to this. It was the problems when things aren't going as planned or as best, and it ran the range from absolute dire maliciousness to just oversights. Oops, I forgot, and things like that. And the word could be used for that entire range of behaviors. It didn't. It was a continuum, not a just an extreme kind of thing. But it wasn't until Augustine came along that Augustine wrote, the City of God, and he wrote his Confessions. And it was Augustine who gave the church something the church really needed, but it didn't have up until his time. Augustine was the first person to ever give to the church an exhaustive overview of all the various concepts and ideas that Christianity struggles with. Up until that time, nobody had ever created a systematic theology or a step-by-step teaching mechanism whereby people could learn the concepts and principles of a well-rounded, broad-based, exhaustive understanding of the ideas contained in the Christian message. And Augustine was the first person to do this. And the fact that he did it really became a very powerful tool for the church. The problem is that when Augustine did it, not only did he have a very, I think, warped point of view, um, Augustine and his disciples then began a campaign of trying to get rid of everybody and every idea out there that disagreed with the way he was thinking. And prior to Augustine, there were a variety of different attitudes that were entertained within the church community, and nobody was really too much bothered by the fact there were differences of opinion. So what? That didn't matter as much. But now it's after Augustine that the church starts to get very rambunctious about defining in an even stricter way what represents heresy. And after Augustine, it slowly got into the church the nonsense that anything that disagreed with Augustine fundamentally was heresy. And many of the things that people were teaching that were contrary to Augustine were actually turned into straw concepts where they were misrepresented and exaggerated so as to be better attacked. And the church went on its witch hunts. And in some sense, this is part of what I think brought the church down, was it's trying to create a single standard and an attack against anything that seemed to challenge that standard. Now, Augustine was the one who really tried to shape up and give to us in a standardized form this concept of original sin. Now, you may know this, maybe you don't, but it's easy to document and easy to determine that it's true. A lot of things that you might not realize here is this: Augustine was a sex addict. Now, sex addiction is something that in some places is still considered controversial. You'll find some people don't believe that there's any such thing as sex addiction. There's other people that absolutely. Behaviors can be addictive, and well, look, a drug can be addictive because your body can become dependent upon it. Well, studies have shown that there are behaviors you can become physically addicted to. Behaviors can trigger certain things. I mean, I don't want to belabor the point too much. We don't have much time left either. But just like Pavlov's dogs, when he learned to ring the bell and the dogs would salivate, the bell ringing could become associated with endocrine and various hormonal releases in an organism that was trained to respond to the bell. Well, we've definitely documented that various biochemical changes can happen in a person's blood through the result of various different triggers they have invented through behaviors they're involved in. And it's very, very possible to involve oneself in various forms of addiction, as it were, that are in many ways as biochemical as a drug addiction. For some people can be addicted to alcohol, but some people can be addicted to the behavior of drinking alcohol and not necessarily chemically addicted to the alcohol itself. Um, it's possibly addicted to gambling, to shopping, to all sorts of things. And sex is definitely one of the things some people can get so caught up in that it controls their lives even beyond the point of being able to normally regulate it. And Augustine was one such person. He was a womanizer, and he okay, I won't. That was a private message. Um, the he struggled with womanizing. He had to get away from women. In fact, part of the reason he went to a monastery was to get away from women. He couldn't leave them alone, and he tried to resolve this issue. And it was for him an extremely controlling problem. It was for him a problem that brought him great shame. And he wasn't smart enough about psychology to realize that the shame that he felt was part of the fuel that set him up. And it's his concept of his loathsome self that was also a part of what energizes the process of sex addiction. And it was this experience of the inability of what sex addiction was to Augustine that was for him the model of what all sin is like. And so that alarms me that the entire fundamentalist Protestant and Catholic Church has embraced a concept of original sin that is based upon the model embraced by a person who was struggling with some very serious psychological disturbances. That strikes me as odd. But that's exactly what's going on here. A person for whom this has become aberrant behavior, a person who has actually experienced this drive to be more controlling than most people would experience it who have a more healthy relationship with sexuality. And this becomes the model for understanding the nature of sin inside of us. And that I believe in many ways this is where it comes from. Well, there's so much more that we could say about sin, and there's a lot more I'd like to talk about. And I'm more interested in talking about it so that I can debunk the drama and the hyperbole. But I don't want to, in debunking the drama and the hyperbole, begin talking as if, so we don't have any problems. We do have problems, and I think we need to be honest about them and look at them. I think we also need to look at the way that love is a solution to a lot of these problems. And that love is also a solution to being able to better deal with some of these problems that we might not be able to resolve. But one way or another, there's so much more that we can talk about. Anyhow, there we go. And I've had an opportunity to chit chat with you a little bit about sin. I hope it's given you something to think about and realize that we come from a tradition in Christianity where so much has been said about this, and so much has been done about this, and so much has been believed about this that I really think is misguided. And if I could go back to the wrong meaning of blasphemy, if it's blasphemy to say something evil about God, I wonder, what do you call it when we say something evil about human beings made in God's image, when we denigrate them and treat them as if they are in essence something that is disgusting? What does that do to us? How does that affect our development? How does it affect our culture? And things like this. I think that these are very honest questions that we really need to think about and consider in looking at this issue. In the end, I think by focusing on love and the beauty of human beings, by recognizing that inappropriate behavior does need to be dealt with, consequences are appropriate in many ways that are measured and balanced and that are redemptive in aim, that there's ways we can deal with these other issues without having to resort to the belief of evil as a thing in and of itself, or of sin as a thing in and of itself, and that love can become a very real presence in our lives and help us to move forward in that way. Anyhow, well, that's pretty much all I have to say tonight without getting into something more that I do want to say that we don't have time to actually deal with fully. So Having said that, thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you on Sunday. This is Bob Graves, the Unconventional Pastor. See you then.